It is a foreign land, said the mind, a neighboring country. And yet, there was a spontaneous feeling of warmth and familiarity the minute one entered Nepal. The people, the landscape, the language, the customs. There was something strangely comforting about it, an almost instinctive knowing. What was it that made Nepal seem so strangely familiar to an Indian? It seemed like an interesting question to ask. Little did we know that looking for the answer would take us through a fascinating journey. India and Nepal are two nations that share a unique open border. Two neighbors who trust each other enough to allow 1,700 kilometers of unrestricted access to each other. Of this, we decided to pick Raxaul in India to enter Birganj in Nepal. The border towns of Raxaul and Birganj show none of the tension that we may have come to associate with borders along other South Asian neighbors. Here, Nepal is just one long traffic jam away. As inhabitants of one of the busiest trading access points to Nepal, Raxaul's residents have an obvious and perhaps inevitable connection with Nepal.
नेपाल एक विदेश है। इस कारण से विदेश होने के कारण भारतीयों के मन में एक सदा थी प्रारंभ से ही कि हम विदेश जाएंगे, और इतनी आसानी से विदेश जाने का मौका किसी को मिलता नहीं है। इसलिए कि इस देश में जाने के लिए किसी न पासपोर्ट की आवश्यकता है, न वीज़ा की आवश्यकता है। कब चले गए नेपाल और कब चले आए भारत, ये पता नहीं चलता।
The open border facilitates more than just the seemingly romantic notion of easy international travel. For thousands of Indians and Nepalese citizens, it has helped them to freely pursue work opportunities in each other's country. Every morning, Professor Sinha and Mrs. Sinha leave for work. While he makes his way to his college in Raxaul, Mrs. Sinha travels by rickshaw to a different country to teach in Birganj. It's a routine they have been following for the last 20 years.
पर डे मुझे बॉर्डर क्रॉस करना पड़ता है, इसलिए कि रेसिडेंस मेरा रक्सौल में है और वर्किंग वहाँ नेपाल में है। ये दोनों पड़ोसी राष्ट्र के नाम से जाने जाते हैं, भारत और नेपाल, और रक्सौल बिरगंज को ऐसे हम लोग जुड़वा शहर के रूप में देखते हैं।
The economic link between the two countries has only strengthened through time. Since 1996, bilateral trade between India and Nepal has grown more than 10 times, while Nepal's exports to India have grown more than 11 times. In 2010-11, India accounted for 66.4% of all of Nepal's trade with the world. Indian companies are eager investors in Nepal. accounting for more than 45% of foreign direct investment in Nepal. Most of them in infrastructural projects such as hydropower, highways, banking and manufacturing. But it's not just a commercial and business link that makes the relationship between the people living along the border so vibrant. Years of living together has through time created family ties through intermarriages between the people of the two nations, especially in the plains. People living in these regions often refer to it as the Roti Beti Ka Rishta, or a relationship characterized by links established by matrimony and commerce. A relationship we soon found out that went back not just in time, but also in legend. They say it was a wedding between a strong, handsome young prince of Ayodhya and the beautiful and wise princess of Janakpur that started it all. Ayodhya is in modern-day India, while Janakpur is a part of Nepal.
भी तो भारत नेपाल हुआ तो अलग अलग नामकरण हुआ, लेकिन पहले तो जम्बूद्वीप के अंदर में जो जहाँ रहते थे अनुकूल वर वधू से ही विवाह होता था। तो वो टुकड़ा होते होते जब भारत और नेपाल जो भी अड़ोसी पड़ोसी जो राष्ट्र बने, तो वो कुछ बंटवारे के हिस्सा में कोई उधर के कुछ इधर के, तो ये शादी कल्चर जो है वो त्रेता युग से चलने लगा। राम के समय से ही, कुछ दशरथ के समय से, भाई इससे तो बहुत इनकी 150 पीढ़ियों पहले से भी चलता आया है।
The Charumati Stupa, an integral part of Kathmandu's history, is evidence of yet another royal marriage, which is today part of Nepalese folklore. Reportedly between a Patan prince and Charumati, Ashoka's youngest daughter. The marriage is today the subject of plays and books in Nepal.
नेपाल र भारतको सम्बन्ध अहिलेको सम्बन्ध होइन हैन, अब यसको त प्राग ऐतिहासिक कालदेखिकै सम्बन्ध रहिआएको आध्यात्मिक सांस्कृतिक सम्बन्धहरू जारी नै बढ्यो। अहिले पो हामी भारतको सिमाना नेपालको सिमाना भनेर भन्छौँ। त्यो बेला त्यो त्यस्तो भन्ने कुरो पनि थिएन। हामी चाहिँ फ्रीली आवत जावत भइरहन्छन् तपाईहरु हैन। नेपाली मान्छेहरू भारतमा जान्छन्, भारतका मान्छेहरू नेपालमा आइरहन्छन्। अहिले पनि चलिराखेकै छ।
Today, this tradition of mixing and mingling has resulted in Hinduism having become yet another link between the two countries. Pilgrims from both countries use the open border to freely visit temples on either side.
नेपाल के लोग यहाँ चार धाम की यात्रा करने आते हैं और यहाँ के लोग पशुपतिनाथ का दर्शन करने जाते हैं। तो वो बॉर्डर जो है लाइन, पॉलिटिकल बॉर्डर लाइन लोग भूल जाते हैं।
A dip in the waters of the Ganges in the ancient city of Varanasi or Kashi has been one of the most popular destinations for Nepali pilgrims for thousands of years. A significant Nepali population has even made Banaras their home through time.
यहाँ पहले तो लोग मकान खरीद करके जिंदगी भर यहीं रहने के लिए आते थे वृद्धावस्था में। और एक पढ़ने आने का एक कारण लोगों का यही था कि उनके जैसे कि दादा यहाँ पढ़ने आए तो उनके बच्चे यहाँ आगे पढ़ने के लिए, क्योंकि दादा के साथ रहेंगे, एक फैमिली एटमॉस्फेयर में रहेगा। तो इस तरह से कई उदाहरण हैं यहाँ पर कि अपने परिवार के साथ लोग रहकर यहाँ पढ़ाई लिखाई और धार्मिक काम करते थे।
A shared history has ensured a special place for Nepali pilgrims in Varanasi. In fact, one of the bathing banks on the Ganga, the Lalita Ghat, is referred to as the Nepali Ghat. Another significant landmark of this shared past is the massive temple complex that was built by a Nepali king in the same style as the Pashupatinath temple in Kathmandu. An interesting footnote in the story of the Nepalis in Varanasi is the community of Indians of Nepali origin who live together. Often called the Nepali colony, the Dudh Vinayak Mohalla goes back at least 200 years. The forefathers of most who now live here had once come to India for trade or for education.
Varanasi was again one of the centers for the India's religion, India's not only religion, but it was also considered to be the center for the knowledge. That was one area which has been established as a center for knowledge for India and Indians. So these scholars from Nepal who would come, scholars from India who would be there, and Varanasi again being the place where there were many aspects which could really be encouraged by these scholars in terms of the pursuit of the knowledge.
With the passage of time, Varanasi also came to be known for a different kind of education. The Banaras Hindu University played host to innumerable sons and daughters of Nepal. Among them were people like B.P. Koirala, who after playing a significant role in India's struggle for independence, went on to become Nepal's first democratically elected Prime Minister in 1959.
आप जहाँ रहते हैं वहाँ के पॉलिटिक्स से थोड़ा सा इम्प्रेस होते हैं, प्रभाव पड़ता है थोड़ा, तो उस प्रभाव से आप उसमें उस धारा में एक धारा जो बहती है उसमें आप बह जाते हैं। तो वो जो नेपाली यहाँ रहते थे तो वो भी उससे अछूते नहीं रहे।
The Nepalese are today such an intrinsic part of the fabric of Varanasi's culture that it is impossible to imagine the city without them. Shyam, for instance, is a young priest from Nepal who moved to Benares to complete his religious studies. The quest to understand Hinduism led him to the study of the language of the scriptures, Sanskrit, which, like most Indian languages, is the root for the Nepali language as well.
बनारस आने से पहले पूर्व 2 साल मैंने नेपाल में संस्कृत पढ़ा। स्कूल पढ़ते पढ़ते मेरे को एक ख्याल आया कि और कोई संस्कृत के बारे में बोलते थे, संस्कृत पढ़ने वाले ऐसे होते हैं वैसे होते हैं। मेरे मन में भी एक इच्छा हुआ कि मैं भी संस्कृत लाइन में जाऊं। आखिर उसमें क्या है? फिर मैंने भैया से बोला कि मैं बनारस जाना चाहता हूं। तो पहले तो मना किए थे, अभी समय नहीं हुआ, अभी बहुत छोटे हो। तो फिर बाद में बोले ठीक है, तुम इतना जिद्दी करे तो जाओ, देख के आओ, देखना चाहिए, हर चीज़ समझना चाहिए क्या है, पढ़ना ही सिर्फ नहीं रहता है, उसको समझो पहले। तो मैंने डिसाइड कर लिया, हाँ मैं भी बनारस आऊँगा।
Today Shyam is not just proficient in the language, but is also one of the priests who preside over the famous and popular Ganga Aarti on the banks of the river in Varanasi.
2000 लगभग 7-8 से मैं उस अभी आरती कर रहा हूँ। जब आरती मिला मेरे को मैं बहुत खुश था। मैं भी सोचता था अरे मैं भी उस स्टेज पे हूँ जहाँ हज़ारों लोग मेरे को देखेंगे। ये मेरे को बहुत खुश।
Hinduism is not the only religious link between the two countries. Just as popular are the shrines dedicated to another person of yore who had Nepali roots, Gautam Buddha. An Indian prince with a Nepali mother, Siddharth was born in what is present-day Nepal. Much later, his teachings were taken back to his maternal home, where they were adopted and adapted into the dominant practice of Hinduism.
We did not consider Buddhism to be different religion at all, because of the Nam Avatara Prabhu Buddha Rupa Dharanam. That's what we used to sing. The 9th avatar of Vishnu was Buddhist. After Krishna, after Rama and Krishna, Nama Avatar Prabhu Buddha Rupa Dharanam. You go to Swayambhu, it's a Hindu shrine just outside there. If you go to Pasutnath, you'll see Buddhist shrine there. They all coexisted. Chaitya and temples, they always coexisted.
This seemed to ring a bell somewhere. A tradition of coexistence and tolerance, despite the occasional shattering, was something India was known for. Clearly, the ability to accept difference, never easy, lived in the collective psyche of our neighboring country too. And much like India, Nepal has many differences that it must reconcile and live with. The people of Nepal trace their roots to either the Indo-Aryan or the Tibeto-Burman lineage. But through time, distinct communities have developed, each with their own cultural nuances. Prominent among them are the Tharus, who created lives for themselves in the Terai regions of the south, the Newars, who lived in and around the Kathmandu Valley, and the Gorkhas, Tamangs and Gurungs, who made the mountains their home. Legends speak of centuries of migration from India to Nepal for various reasons. At times, it was spurred by trade, at others by reasons of power and politics. With these movements of men and women came even newer bonds of matrimony, culture, and trade.
Migration has always been the major factor of Indo-Nepali political, cultural, religious relationship. It is not the question of just king and his wife and children coming to Nepal. The whole people have migrated. Like today also people migrate in a group. There is seasonal migration, there is longer time migration, but there is always migration because we have open border.
A hint of what life may have been like thousands of years ago still lives on among these red brick walls of the ancient cities of Bhaktapur and Patan in the Kathmandu Valley. Historical references to trade between Indian kingdoms and those in Nepal can be traced back to as early as the 4th century BC. Even Kautilya's Arthashastra speaks of spices, herbs, woolens and silks being brought from the kingdoms in Kathmandu. These flourishing trade ties created great prosperity, and this in turn tempted more Indians to migrate to Nepal.
Naturally, wherever there is a production, the things would go from there and to the other places. So this was, and people gathered there. Obviously, the tendency of the people will also be there to migrate to the places from where they will get some employment and further livelihood. So that is how those centers would develop further. So the attraction of the people for that place, because that offers you the livelihood, that is the place where you can get some more things, the amenities would get developed. So it was like that.
Two groups of people who were among the thousands who migrated to Nepal went on to establish significant kingdoms in Kathmandu. The Licchavis came first from Vaishali in modern-day Bihar and ruled between the 4th and the 8th century BC.
Since the Licchavis came from Vaishali, they brought the political culture, political tradition, spiritual culture tradition, later Vedic period culture, education, a lot of things. So developed culture and civilization more or less in the same pattern of Gangetic periods, North India. So this is the time when we see there are a lot of parallels between the North Indian, entire Indian state and culture and Nepali state and culture.
This connection between the people of the Kathmandu Valley and the Indo-Gangetic plains was only strengthened later with the coming of the Mallas from Mithila, also in Bihar, who ruled between the 12th and 18th century AD. India had by then begun to see the arrival of the Mughals, and this influenced those living in Nepal as well.
Kathmandu being the center, negotiating and promoting trade between India and Tibet as well. In the Malla period, this became even more clear and more prosperous, because the kings were, after the latest fashion that the Muslims and later the Mughal kings were having, in terms of food and spices and dress and patterns and everything this time, because the economy was not just farm economy but also commercial economy, selling their products. So the Mallas developed that. So the Malla palace and Malla culture, Malla family, so everything was patterned after the Mughal palace culture.
This was also the time when a different kind of migration to Nepal began to take place. As new rulers came to India from the west, conquering kingdoms that came in their way, vanquished kings and their families often sought to preserve their culture and escape the ignominy of defeat. Time and again, they would find refuge in Nepal.
From Rajasthan, therefore, all the Hindu princes began to come to Nepal and take shelter in the hills, some Tarai and mostly western hills of Nepal, because they wanted to protect, first of all, their family, their culture, their power, traditions.
The indigenous community of the Tharus was one Nepali ethnic group that extended help and hospitality to some of the fleeing Rajputs from India. Over time, there was intermarriage between the clans and an inevitable sharing of culture and practices.
हमारी जंगली सभ्यता थी, अर्थात वन सभ्यता के मुताबिक ही हम अपना रहन बसन करने का तौर तरीका हम अपनाए हुए थे। तो वो जब वहाँ से भारत प्रदेश से आए, जब राजस्थान साइड से आए, तो राजस्थान के वास्तुकला को हमको दिया, उनके दिए हुए कला को अपनाकर हम लोग भी अपना रहन बसन, घर बनाने का तौर तरीका, खेती गृहस्थी करने का तौर तरीका और बोलने की शैली इत्यादि हमको मिली है, वहाँ से शब्द ज्ञान हुआ है।
There are other stories too of how, in a strange twist of fate, women in the Tharu community have found a voice and empowerment within the community because of their Rajasthani Rajput roots.
जैसे राणा प्रताप के सेनाओं में पदाधिकारी उच्च स्तर के जो भी अधिकारी उच्चाधिकारी थे, तो वो वहाँ से राज परिवार के कुछ बीवियों को, रानियों को, मतलब औरतों को अपने साथ सुरक्षा के लिए अपने साथ लाए, इस मतलब कि वन क्षेत्र में। तो वो तो रहे राणा परिवार की संस्कारित महिलाएं, और उनकी जो है सो अब एक वैवाहिक संबंध यहाँ के आदिवासी जनजाति थारुओं से हुआ, तो उनकी संस्कार ऊंची थी और वो अपने को राणा परिवार की एक सदस्या के रूप में मानती थी। इसलिए इनसे, जिनसे इनका वैवाहिक अनुबंध हुआ है, उनको जो है सो थोड़ा सा दूसरे ग्रेड का, मैंने एक अपने से एक ग्रेड कम समझती थी लोग। इसलिए जो है सो अपनी हुकूमत अर्थात अपनी बातों को जो है सो, या अर्थ संबंधी हो, धर्म संबंधी हो, वैवाहिक संबंधी हो, जीवन के पारिवारिक जीवन के बारे में वो अपने आप को एक उच्च स्तर पर रखकर जो है सो सलाह इत्यादि दिया करती थी। इसलिए उनकी महत्ता बढ़ती गई, उनकी प्रमुखता परिवार में स्थान पाती गई।
While the generosity of those in Nepal was one of the primary reasons why it became such a safe refuge for these migrants from Western India, there was also geography at play. The mighty Himalayas protected Nepal from the north and east. Along the south and west were the dense malaria-ridden forests of the Terai region. This made the task of attacking Nepal formidable, if not impossible, for foreigners.
आए तापनि यदि अमेरिका पनि मुसलमान आएको कुरो छ तपाईँको, तर क्षणिक केही दिन बस्यो गयो, बस्न सक्दैन तपाईँको। यहाँ हावापानीले गर्दाखेरि, भौगोलिक परिस्थितिले गर्दाखेरि, विकट अवस्थाले गर्दाखेरि विदेशीहरूले त्यति गर्न सकेन। त्यसैले हामीहरूको स्वाधीनता स्वतन्त्र चाहिँ जारी कायम भइराख्यो। विदेशीहरूले तपाईँको यहाँ रजाइ गर्न पाएन। जो जति आए यी नेपाली नै भएर बसिदिए।
It is this shared history of mutual respect and large-heartedness that has created a sense of trust and openness with each other through the ages. Dr. Sanduk Ruit is a Magsaysay award-winning eye surgeon in Nepal. But it was a sense of trust his parents instinctively felt with India that allowed him to study there and eventually become a doctor. And he says he was merely one of the thousands who came from Nepal to India to pursue an education.
So I would say that the open border at that time, which was resulting into a free access of education, particularly into good schools, really contributed to to give a good base to the Nepalese. And I think partly because the reason was open border, you could go and no hassles, go and have your educations and then come back. The creams of Nepal who are at technical decision making, and even politicians, and most of the people you see now had some or the other connections in terms of education in India in their lifetime. So there has been a very strong and very constructive, I think, that India has given to Nepal in terms of education.
Education has always been an important component of the relationship between India and Nepal. Each year, nearly 2,000 scholarships are sponsored by India for Nepalese students in both India and Nepal. Perhaps it is this that facilitates a feeling of comfort amongst both Indians and Nepalese as they comfortably make each other's country their home. The Srivastavas are one such family. The family of 4 brothers has been living in Nepal for 3 generations. They may trace their roots to India, but in their ethos, they are completely one with Nepali culture. And so, despite some of their children having gone back to India, the older generation has decided to stay back in Kathmandu, their home now for more than 30 years.
एक बिल्कुल फ्रेंडली है सब, कोई भी ओकेजन होता है उसमें आना जाना, कोई फंक्शन हुआ तो उसमें आना जाना, जैसे पूजा हुआ हमारे यहाँ तो जैसे उस इंडिया में हम लोग का है कि प्रसाद बना तो उसके यहाँ दिए, सत्यनारायण पूजा हुआ तो उनके यहाँ से प्रसाद आया। अब जैसे हम जाते हैं हम लोग इंडिया तो सब कहती है ये तो नेपाली हो गई है, बिल्कुल ड्रेसअप भी नेपाली हो गया है, इसका सब बोलना नेपाली हो गया है, तो चेंज अब 40 ईयर्स में तो बहुत चेंज आ गया हम लोग में।
ऐसे बच्चे लोगों का बहुत प्रेशर है कि अब आप लोग वहाँ रह करके क्या कीजिएगा काठमांडू में, लेकिन वी डोंट फील कंफर्टेबल। वैसे कल्चरली दिल्ली भी हम लोगों के लिए लैंग्वेज वाइज और रिलीजन वाइज दिल्ली इज़ ऑल्सो वेरी गुड, लेकिन यहाँ का क्लाइमेट, पीपल, द फ्रेंड्स दैट वी हैव मेड, दैट अट्रैक्ट्स अस अ लॉट, इसलिए काठमांडू छोड़ने का कोई प्रोग्राम नहीं है।
Jai Krishna Giri first came to India 15 years ago. But little did he know then that he would eventually settle in the country. Today, he is the proud owner of 2 restaurants in the busy tourist locality of Paharganj in the Indian capital city of Delhi.
जैसे हम लोग इंडिया से और नेपाल से लोग बाहर यूरोप अमेरिका जाने की सोच होता है, इसी तरह इंडिया में भी लोग बाहर के लोग आते हैं कि इंडिया जाना है एक बार। कैसे भी लोग हो, कोई रिलीजियस लोग आते हैं, कोई बिजनेस लोग आते हैं, कोई अब धार्मिक हिसाब से आने और अलग टाइप से लोग आते हैं, तो सबको खाना तो खाना ही पड़ेगा। मैं कोशिश इसलिए करता हूँ कि ज़्यादा उनको पैसे तो उनको कहीं भी खर्चा करना है, लेकिन मैं कोशिश करता हूँ उनको पैसे लेने के साथ खाना भी खाए पेट भर और अच्छे से खुश होके जाए। ये भी मेरे लिए जो है ना सेवा का भावना लगता है मेरे को।
Giri's restaurants serve not just continental and Chinese dishes, but also a delicious and familiar-looking Nepali thali. Nepalese food, though similar to Indian cuisine, differs in its use of spices. This makes the experience of eating Nepali food seem, once again, strangely familiar and yet distinctly different.
नेपाली खाना और इंडियन खाना में तो फर्क सी देखने में लगता है, लेकिन वो इंडियन मसाला है उसमें जो थोड़ा ज़्यादा स्पाइसी होता है, उनके थोड़ा हेवी टाइप का होता है, नेपाली में थोड़ा लाइट टाइप का होता है, और वो लोग ज़्यादा कुक करते हैं, हम लोग थोड़ा कम कुक करते हैं, और मसाला थोड़ा हमारा थोड़ा कम होता है, ऑयली भी थोड़ा कम होता है।
Giri was once chef with one of the best hotels in Nepal and could have gone anywhere in the world to run his own restaurants. But he says it was the sense of cultural comfort afforded by living and working in India that made him stay on in Delhi.
देखो जी, अब जो किसी को भी अपने जन्मभूमि तो बड़ा अच्छा लगता है, सबको भूल तो नहीं सकता है, इसलिए मेरे को नेपाल को तो याद तो बहुत आता है, और ये मेरा कर्म भूमि है दिल्ली में, इंडिया में, तो ये भी मेरे को बड़ा अच्छा लगता है, क्योंकि बच्चे पता नहीं बच्चे भी वो मूव करके जाएंगे नहीं जाएंगे वो मेरे को पता नहीं है, वो हमें अभी तक सोच लगा कभी कभी गांव में बैठेंगे जैसे लगता है, क्योंकि मेरे ही सोच वाला मेरे लेवल का आदमी उम्र का जो है ना, गांव में थोड़ा रिटायर्ड लाइफ में थोड़ा अच्छा लगता होगा जैसे लगता है मेरा अभी तक, पता नहीं इन फ्यूचर आई डोंट नो।
The Shrestha brothers did just that. Once they retired, they decided to return to Nepal despite having created lives in India. It was a difficult decision, but they now run cafes and schools in the temple town of Manakamna. Their connection with India, though, remains strong, especially since theirs is a very unusual story. men from the Shrestha family have been proud warriors as part of the Indian Army for 2 generations.
मेरा पिताजी का भी 4 भाई थे, तो मेरे पिताजी सबसे बड़ा, और वो भी इंडियन आर्मी में थे कभी। और दूसरा मेरा पिताजी के भाई, और तीसरा, ये तीनों ने फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड वार लड़ी है इंडिया की तरफ से। जो मेरा अभी चाचा बोलो, उसका अभी हाल साल में डेथ हुआ है। वो तो करीब फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड वार और सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वार मिला के करीब 28 देशों में पहुंच के भी आए वाला है लड़के। अभी मेरे पिताजी के कोई भी भाई जिंदा नहीं है, और बाकी हमारे ही पिताजी के बस हम 7 भाई थे, और हम 7 भाई अभी इंडियन आर्मी में सर्विस करके रिटायर हो के भी सब आ चुके हैं।
Each of the 7 Shrestha brothers have fought wars and risked their lives for India. But they are not the only ones. Brave men from Nepal have been fighting as part of the Indian Army for nearly 200 years. It all began with a young Gorkha prince who had a near audacious dream of unifying the 46 feudal states in Nepal into one strong country. Prithvi Narayan Shah, who traced his roots to a Rajput clan, turned his vision into a magnificent reality in 1769, and Nepal was one.
46 राज्य छोटे-छोटे स्टेट थे, तो उनको सबको जीत करके पृथ्वी नारायण शाह ने एक नेपाल नाम, पहले लोग नेपाल खाली काठमांडू को बोलते थे, तो पूरे नेपाल को उन्होंने जोड़ करके नेपाल में।
But the Gorkha prince's success in unifying Nepal brought him head to head with another powerful empire trying to gain control over India. The inevitable happened and they fought. Shah's army lost the battle, but his brave Gorkha soldiers won hearts.
With the greater sophistication of British weaponry, training of soldiers, the Nepalese could not match that. But in terms of bravery, courage, and the willingness to fight, the Gorkhas demonstrated an unique sense of military capability, which really surprised the British. And the British hugely admired those qualities of the Nepalese. They only lost when their ammunition finally gave way. And so then they actually asked for a ceasefire and asked the British to give them some more ammunition so that they could continue to fight the British. It was that sort of a story those days. And so British largely admired their courage. And then they asked and gave the Nepalese army under Amar Singh Thapa the unique honor of allowing them to march out of the fort with their arms and weapons intact. And after that, through a treaty mutually agreed upon, they asked the Gorkhas to join the British Army.
And thus was born the Gorkha Regiment, which went on to earn a reputation for bravery across the world for its exploits, even joining the Indian Army after India won independence.
India had one of the by far the largest volunteer army in the world. But then soon after the Second World War and Indian independence, the whole British Indian Army had to be reconstituted into a British Army, the Indian Army, and a Pakistan Army. So it was decided that the Gorkhas will continue to serve in the Indian Army. So Gorkhas, it was agreed, will serve in the Indian Army as well as in the British Army. And at that time, there were a total of 10 regiments of Gorkhas serving in the British Army, and this was decided to be split up. And the soldiers were asked to volunteer as to which army they will join. Overwhelming majority decided to join the Indian Army.
And thus began a new relationship of trust between independent India and Nepal, where citizens of a different country were also entrusted with the responsibility of safeguarding India and her borders through the Gorkha Regiment.
the security of the entire Indian subcontinent, whether it's India or Nepal, is intertwined and cannot be made distinct. And so therefore there is an intimacy in this relationship bred by this common group of soldiers, common traditions and common strategic requirements. And so therefore there's a great deal of close relationship between the two armies.
What also bestows greater intimacy and familiarity between the Nepali and the Indian is the presence of a significant Nepali community which has lived in India for hundreds of years. Initially concentrated around Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Darjeeling and Assam, Indians of Nepali origin have over time joined the Indian mainstream. Tenzing Norgay, Udit Narayan, Louis Banks, Sunil Chhetri, Manisha Koirala, Mala Sinha and Prashant Tamang are just some examples of those with a Nepali connect who have become an inalienable part of the shared Indian consciousness. With the passage of time and the coming of newer generations, newer connects are now coming into being. As always, music has turned out to be one such link. The popular Nepali folk music band Kutumba, for instance, brought their music to enthusiastic audiences in India during the 2010 Commonwealth Games and left behind a number of fans.
We performed 2 days straight, and there were like lots of people, and after the concert, like all the audience, wanted to meet us. We had to run away. And even the sound guy from the Commonwealth game, what he said was, you guys are from Nepal and you play folk instruments, try to perform some Bollywood songs, like people from like Pakistan, they sang like a couple of like Bollywood songs and they were like quite appreciated. So you could do that, like they said. But still we tried our best, and we did one Kajrare in Nepali style, and it was like really lovely,
Say good afternoon.
The reaction of Nepali fans to Indian bands is equally heartwarming. When Divine Connection, an Indian band from Nagaland, was invited to perform in Kathmandu, they had young Nepali boys and girls dancing and cheering. For the band members too, it was a memorable experience.
In fact, I think everybody back home, we have the third house is a Nepali family. we have so many Nepali families in the neighborhood. So in fact, there is a locality just called Nepali Basti back home in Dimapur. So Nepalis and Nagas, we share. I mean, if I'm allowed to say, I share much more connection with them. Once when we were shooting in Mumbai, people thought we were Nepalis. In India, they thought, we were a Nepali band playing in MTV Rock-On. Just to come here and as a band, and to see people coming to the concert, just enjoying the music, and us to be able to play a Hindi song and to see the crowd react, that's more than the beginning, that's so much, we could do so much more, there's so much hope, so much room for us to make, the connection.
Traveling through Nepal had turned out to be a fascinating journey. It had introduced us to a proud people and revealed associations between India and Nepal in the most unexpected of places. That instinctive feeling of familiarity with the country and its people was now beginning to make sense. But we wondered if the heritage of shared trust and goodwill would be strong enough to keep alive the bond between the coming generations. Would newer links and connections be required? Perhaps again, the answer lay in the past. Perhaps the relationship would be preserved and nurtured with changes through time that would create their own stories of continuity.